Um, Mr. Woods, I just have to ask you, who are the shareholders? Are any part of those shareholders retired teachers in Texas whose pension plans may invest in your stock?
Absolutely. A very large proportion of the people who own our stock look for our dividends as a source of income. One of the reasons why we walked such a fine line in 2020 during the pandemic was maintain those dividends, recognizing the important role they play in retirees and the average American family.
And I think that needs to be underscored. I suspect the same is true for almost every one of our witnesses here today. To encourage production, and my thesis is that the federal regulatory burden has increased over the last 15 months. We saw what regulatory reduction did in the previous administration and led us to a situation where really we were energy independent, we were energy dominant in the world. So on that thesis of lowering regulations and increasing the performance of the federal agencies that are supposed to provide you with the permits to drill, I'm concerned because at the federal agency level, we've got a ton of people who haven't yet returned to work. They're still working from home, and I can't help but feel that impacts your ability to get an answer from a federal agency in a timely fashion. So for that reason, I introduced a bill that will withhold any future unallocated COVID funding from the Department of Interior until they return to work to address your permitting problems. I've also introduced a bill that would immediately restart all oil and gas leasing permitting on federal land and prohibit the president from delaying the issuance of future oil and gas leases, permits, approvals, or authorizations on federal land authorization. This administration needs to get back to work, and they need to rescind their anti-energy executive orders and ramp up production here in America. We cannot forget, in September of 2019, in an unguarded moment, then former Vice President Joe Biden promised a young voter, I guarantee you, we will end fossil fuels. So, Mr. Woods, let me ask you, the Biden administration has claimed that the oil and gas industry is sitting on more than 12 million acres of non-producing federal land with 9,000 unused but already approved permits for production. So can we go through this? Just talk to us a little bit about how you obtain a federal lease.
I would tell you today, Congressman, we have about 2,000 leases on federal lands, and all but about 1% of those are producing oil or gas.
So after you get approved for federal lease, can you immediately start to drill?
It is a fairly complicated process that requires understanding, one, what's on the lease, developing plans to produce that, the discoveries that you have on the lease, putting gathering systems in, getting permits for that, infrastructure to move product to oil. So it is a fairly complex, interdependent system of permits and investments across from the drill well all the way to the market. It's a fairly complicated and long process, particularly with delays in the regulatory process.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And it almost seems like the administration is being disingenuous when they accuse you of not performing on these leases. It is a complex and complicated process precisely because we make it a complex and complicated process. Let me just ask you again, Mr. Woods, do you think Congress could play a role in providing greater clarification of Department of Interior's leasing and permitting procedures to avoid potential litigation?
I think increased clarity, increased certainty, increased predictability, more efficient and effective permitting processes and regulatory processes would benefit the industry significantly.
Thank you. And I've got a ton more questions I'm going to submit to all of you for the record, but Mr. McMaster, let me just ask you, we've seen now the releases from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in a non-emergent situation. We hear over and over again that energy security is national security. Are we putting our national security at risk with these releases from the SPR?
I don't know what the extent of the risk is, but there is risk associated with it. I think it's going to be important to replenish those reserves at some point, hopefully when prices are lower. But I do think that this is obviously a short-term measure for what is really a long-term, what I would characterize as an opportunity to increase U.S. production in a way that satisfies the global market and, again, reduces the coercive power of authoritarian regimes. Thank you.
I thank you for your testimony, Dave. Thank you for your written testimony.